Thank you to everyone for joining us. I know this is an absolutely absurd moment in the semester if you're at UT, so I appreciate you taking the time, and I want to thank my panelists as well for joining us today for this conversation. You are currently in the dynamism and diversity of queer storytelling. For me, I should introduce myself. I'm Jo Hsu. I'm an assistant professor of rhetoric and writing, and I really love this opportunity to talk about queer storytelling because it is the framework through which I think through everything. Stories are, I think about the quote from Thomas King, the truth about stories is that's all we are. I think about the fact that stories are the only means we have of making knowledge of experience, particularly when they're from structurally marginalized perspectives. So I see that as a through line through the work of our panelists. They can correct me if I am reading incorrectly, but I will introduce them at this point. So I'm just going to go through each of our panelists, and then I have some questions to get a discussion started, and I'll reserve the last 15 to 20 minutes for questions from the audience. If you have questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function. It should be down at the bottom of your screen. If you put the mouse toward the bottom, it should have a little bar that pops up, and the Q&A is at the right-hand side. So first, we have André D. Singleton, he, him, his. André, aka Bloodstone, is a Bay Area-based educator, human rights activist, deaf midwife, and multidisciplinary artist born in Kansas City, Missouri. Widely known as the co-creator of the Very Black Project, a well-known and revered social awareness initiative that celebrates the African diaspora. He is a thread within a fabric of pioneers on a mission to unite people from an abundance of cultural backgrounds. Continuously enduring the long-term side effects of a terminal illness and embracing his sexuality as a Black gay man in a very anti-Black, anti-artist, anti-sick, and homophobic society has empowered Singleton to approach life with a fierce determination to be free and embracing of his truth while inspiring others to get and stay free. Singleton's work continues to inspire courage, pride, and vulnerability, encouraging people all over the world to respect one another so that our communities might remain enriching for us all. Very Ubuntu. Thank you for joining us, Andre. And next is Drew Riley, she, her. Drew Riley is an award-winning artist based in Austin, Texas, who uses portraiture and storytelling to explore the complexities of gender. Her series, Gender Portraits, documents trans, intersex, and gender nonconforming people through vibrant acrylic paintings paired with written accounts of the subject's experiences. Riley is also the founder of Gender Unbound, a nonprofit project of the Austin Creative Alliance that uplifts trans and intersex people through the arts. She served as executive director of Gender Unbound for 7 years, leading a team of community organizers to create affirming trans and intersex community events in Austin, Texas, including the annual Gender Unbound Art Festival. Through these events, Gender Unbound has showcased hundreds of trans and intersex artists from around the world and across disciplines. Thanks for joining us, Drew. And finally, Jordan E. Cooper, he, him, his. Jordan is an Obie Award-winning playwright and performer who was most recently chosen to be one of Out Magazine's Entertainer of the Year. Last year, he starred in a sold-out run of his play, Ain't No More, which was a New York Times Critics Pick. Jordan created a pandemic-centered short film called Mama Got a Cough, which I've recently found on YouTube, so that you can find that. And that's been featured in National Geographic and was named Best of 2020, also by the New York Times. He was also featured on the final season of FX's Pose as MC Tyrone. He recently created and executive produced his first television project, The Miss Pat Show, which is an R-rated old school sitcom that premiered to record-breaking numbers on BET+. Thanks for joining us, Jordan. So I'm going to begin with some questions to generate some conversation. I welcome our panelists to chime in as they feel free to expand, elaborate, ask one another questions, really just hoping for a free-form sort of casual conversation. I'd like to ask you all to begin just by describing your work, perhaps focusing on the visions, the desires, or the values that really inform your approach to storytelling.
Hello, peace everybody. Hi Jordan.
Hi Dre.
So proud of you. I'm like, can we just start talking? Um, in brief, I'm a proud African man in the West, person, soul. I really don't describe things as much as work, as much as purpose and gifts and assignments. Um, yeah, and I think what's most important for me to just honor where I am now as a living person. I'm in Ohlone territory, Oakland, California. Um, and I just give thanks for the ancestors, guardians, and guides that put this group of gatekeepers together to just, be in a symposium, which is what we do. So as we connect more and deeper, I'll talk. I feel like I'll know which offerings to come up, because I'm also just really nervous and really grateful for Janelle, Yaki, Chuka, the team making sure we're good. So thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'll kind of piggyback off of that, starting with I'm kind of nervous. It's been a long pandemic, and this is my first real discussion, panel type conversation in about 3 years because of that. And I had to actually peruse my own work to remind myself of what I do before this because I felt I was that rusty. I created a series back in 2013 and continued it for the last however many years it's been since that. It is a fine art series and it's a documentary series where I pair fine art portraits with written accounts taken from people to document the lived experiences of individuals with gender, and specifically individuals who would fall out of societal norms of the gender spectrum: trans people, intersex people, gender nonconforming people, including drag performers, and just really trying to show the relationship of people with gender. And my inspiration and my whole motivation through this work is my own lived experiences as a trans woman, and also my experiences coming out in 2010 and having to try and have conversations with people about gender, and realizing that concepts and narratives and just basically everyone's language around gender was so limited and binary. I wanted to create more examples for people to be exposed to the broad spectrum that is gender. That's when I created my work. Yeah.
We appreciate you breaking your long pandemic pause to join us for this conversation. And Jordan, you are last but definitely not least.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited and grateful for Yaki and Yujo for having me, and other panelists. It's an honor to sit on the panel with you. I am a playwright, actor, director, producer, all the things in the television and film and stage mediums. Just trying to do the work of expanding the conversation around Blackness and expanding the conversation around queerness in all the ways that I can. Right now, I'm actually in my office on set, working on the season 2 of my sitcom, The Miss Pat Show, which also deals with queerness a lot. But yeah, I'm just really excited to dive in and expand these conversations and really do a little bit of the work on Zoom.
Yeah, so when I was looking at your profiles, your enormously diverse and inspiring bodies of work, I noticed that community seemed to be a really grounding concept for all of you. And I often find myself thinking about the many challenges and impediments and shortcomings of queer community, as well as the sort of many gifts that come with it. So I was hoping you all might speak to what brought you to community as such a driving force, and sort of what your relationship to that term or that concept is.
Absolutely, I can start. Community for me was something that, growing up in DFW, Texas, I wasn't necessarily exposed to queer community. I was exposed to Black community in a loving community and supportive community, but not necessarily exposed to queer community. Most of that had to do with my own internalized homophobia, just being, raised the way that I was. and not necessarily acknowledging or accepting a lot of myself. And so therefore I actually never really got a chance to interact and have conversations and commune with other queer folks until I moved to New York for school in 2014, where I also worked with André during my work study. Hey. But it wasn't until then that I found a community of queer Black folks and queer folks in general, which included André, who actually, just showed me that nobody cares. Like nobody cares. Just be, just be exactly who you need to be, who you want to be, and we'll adjust to that. And that was a huge thing for me because I didn't believe that was possible. So much so that I avoided queerness in my work. I avoided, I had plays produced, I had works produced, and I always avoided queerness. And what's so fascinating is that a friend of mine, Stevie Walker Webb, who's a really brilliant director who also directed my play Ain't No Mo. I remember it was my freshman year and we were like at the gym at Planet Fitness because they gave you pizza on Fridays. And we were at Planet Fitness and we were working out and I was just talking about, being queer and, accepting it and all that good stuff. He was like, well, when are you going to write a queer character? Like, why haven't you written any queer characters? I was like, I don't know. And he was like, well, I'm sure when you do, it's going to be something special. And the thing that actually became the first queer character of mine was the character of Peaches in Ain't No Mo, my play Ain't No Mo, which is about all Black people in America getting a email saying that they had to go back to Africa. And there's this drag queen flight attendant who is there to get all these millions of Black folks onto a plane. And Peaches is just the Blackest, queerest version of myself. I just put it all into that character. And I felt like that was enough of an exorcism. Putting that on paper was enough. Whew. Okay, now I'm unlocking something that actually was what the gift was for in the first place. The gift in the first place was to give voice to this, right? And since then, I've just been challenged in many, many different ways in really stretching my idea of Blackness and stretching my idea of queerness. Lately, I've been telling a lot of people, it's like, I read a play of mine that I wrote like 3 years ago about a character, coming out and not being accepted by his family and and I read it and it felt so arbitrary. It felt so like, why is this the narrative for the queer character? And I've just reached a certain level of my queerness and also my Blackness as an artist where it's like, why does everything starring Black people have to be about Blackness? It is Blackness. Why does everything starring queer people have to be about queerness? It is queer. At some point, I, for myself, had to dig deeper and just write about the life of and not about.
Yeah, I really appreciate you capturing the fact that so many structurally marginalized people, we don't get to just be, right, in stories. If it's a story about a trans person, it's a story about transition, or it's a story about the harm that comes with transition. But like that's the only story that we get, right? And so one of the first challenges of coming in as a storyteller is like, there's no model for the thing you're about to do. And it takes a while out of experience to sort of find the stories that you want to tell that aren't just about what people expect. So thank you for that. And I'll turn it to my other panelists.
I also really look forward to hearing what Drew has to say because I remember in our correspondences that was something that they said was really special. I love Jordan. I live for this. I live for community, and there's a definition I want to start with from an ancestor who I love, ancestor Sabonfu Somé, who I sent it in the chat. I'll drop a couple of things that can really speak to how I feel because as an artist, I don't really often want to talk. I feel like it's being expressed often in my breath and how I live and how I survive. I identify as a survivor artist, as a healing artist. And so this ancestor really, really grounds me. And so this piece is about community from the book, A Welcoming Spirit Home, Ancient African Teachings to Celebrate Children and Community. The community concept is based on the fact that each person is invaluable and truly irreplaceable. Each person has a gift to give, a contribution to make to the whole. The kind of gift a person brings, the kind of being a person is very unique to him or her and is valued by the community. The community is constantly affirming each person, and that constant affirmation is why people are always in the community. We sleep together, we work together, we walk together. When we are separate, we are vulnerable and are more likely to underestimate the self. This way of life may sound like an invasion of privacy to a lot of people, but not in my village. Being in community forces us to cultivate a deeper sense of intimacy with one another, to notice one another and value one another's gifts. And because I often hear the word community, but I understand when there's a group of people who share a common experience or things like that, doesn't always necessarily define community in its essence for me, because this is my 18th year since my cancer diagnosis at 18 years old. I don't feel like there's been a cancer community. These are things I've been fighting for also as a gay man, as one who just was separated from a peer group. Therefore, community is totally defined based off of how I've experienced and not experienced things through medical apartheid, where people don't believe me or they don't see me. And that shows up as me just constantly offering my gift of listening, hearing. Like, I think Jordan is one of the most remarkable souls I've encountered. I remember our passionate discussions as a student and me as an administrator, but also an alum, where it was always healing for me, because I just want to hear what the community has to say. And this also for me ties, all of these things tie into ancient African principles. As an ancient African person in a modern world, who's very modern too in the West, it's not or, it's both. And I think of myself and know myself to be a griot or a jelly, which are these ancient African storytellers, which didn't just tell stories. They remember genealogy. So they're genealogists, they're poets, they're welcomers, they're singers. They're an important thread of the fabric of society. So I think often, because I don't feel I'm in community, I'm hoping I'm leaving gems by being in the threshold and bringing what was left as someone departs physically, emotionally, and just knowing how important that is. So that's what honestly I think of a community, because no one's really there with me when I have to go to oncology appointments or when I'm in the sexual health clinics in the anticipation of a sexual result, from being a gatekeeper, from being free and being okay with that. So yeah, so I'm excited to hear what Drew has to say as well.
Thank you for that. That was actually that was a beautiful description of community. And I also think that what you're just talking about is very relatable in the how community often doesn't serve our intersectionalities, like how often, we have maybe our community that does show up for those appointments, which may look more like our family, like our biological family or our closest friends or whatever that closest family unit is for you, yet they may not share your queer identities and may not serve you in that way. Or, for me, actually, as a trans woman, there's a lot of times where I'm in queer communities and I don't actually feel served in my transness in a way that trans communities do. And oftentimes I find myself bouncing from community to community to try and get a little bit of this need met and a little bit of that need met, and I need all of them, a community of communities. And actually, so to talk about community related to my work, community is what I center my work on, and actually what I've learned to center my life around as much as possible. And I think that that's because I spent so much time without it. And when I started my work, I actually was coming from a place where I knew two other trans people. And the idea that I would make a series documenting the diversity of gender, knowing only two trans people, is kind of baffling to me in this present moment. But I had this kind of oh, I'm sure I can find it people, even though I had actually been spending a huge chunk of my life searching for other people like me and coming up empty. And I'm glad that I made that leap, because I did actually, my work gave me the gift of community. I went from knowing almost no one like myself to knowing hundreds of people like myself. And it was the best gift I had ever given to myself. And I was hoping that through this work that I was doing, that I would be giving other people the gift of community. If they are feeling isolated, maybe looking at this work could make them have solidarity, have connection, make them feel more normalized. And I have seen it do that, but I actually feel like I never anticipated what I needed to give myself. I wasn't really looking inward, and it ended up being the best thing I ever did for myself. And then also to kind of go back to what I was saying earlier about that like intersectionality, another thing that I ended up doing in my work is really trying in the queer community in Austin, Texas, carving out a larger space for trans people and intersex people to exist in the like larger queer community. Because when I first started going to queer events, I didn't see anyone like myself. Everything seemed to be created for and centered around cisgender, endosex, white men, white gay men. And I literally had people tell me, why are you here? Asking why I belonged at an event that didn't just call itself like an LGBTQIA event. They called themselves a queer event, you know, like a term that is supposed to be reclaimed for its expansiveness and its inclusiveness. And I found myself having to defend my right to be in a space. And so I started going to places, putting my art up on full display on tripods. I hired a local artist to paint parasols with trans like flag colors and hung them up all behind me. I had flags draped across booths. I wanted from like miles out for people to see just trans pride. And I noticed that also I was the only person I never really thought I would be like a merchandiser with I'm an artist, right? I was trying to share my artwork, but I started going and tabling at places and selling trans pride merch because I noticed no one else had them. People would come and look at my art and share my stories, and then they would ask me like, where can I get a trans pride flag? Or where can I get like a little, they have buttons over there and it's all about, being gay, but where can I get like a little trans like button? And so I started making that stuff and selling it because I was seeing a huge gap of need of people wanted to be able to wear their pride outwardly and weren't actually being given it. And a lot of that has shifted in Austin. I want to give some credit in our community's growth. There's still a long way to go. But that's also one of the reasons why I founded Gender Unbound, the nonprofit that was mentioned in my intro. And that organization, it is a trans and intersex-led organization that creates community events, affirming events for trans and intersex people, centering trans and intersex artists. So we showcase artists. We've done 5 different art festivals. And we have done like art markets and Trans Day of Visibility and Intersex Awareness Day, and like creating these events where people show up, and also on stage they see themselves, on the walls they see themselves, at the tables they see themselves, and it is like explicitly exclusively trans and intersex, and that was something that I just didn't see. I had not seen before. And so I went out and created it, and it's been beautiful. So yeah, that's community is everything for me. And it's saved me.
Also, can I pick up off of that just to say how imperative and how beautiful it is that when you didn't see community, you created community. That is not only life affirming for you, but life affirming for someone who you may have never interacted with.
Yeah, people who build from their space of need so that others don't have to go through that thing. That's who I live for, right? Something I appreciate about what all of you highlight about community is that so often this is an idea or a term that's taken for granted, as if this is a thing that pre-exists, and it comes from perspectives of people for whom it pre-exists. But all of you talked about it as this thing that is deliberately engaged, that is intentional, that is forged, because it is so often something that we've had to create. So I appreciate that about your reflections and also your work. Thinking about appreciation, I was hoping that you could each share a moment when you felt affirmed in your decision to become an artist. I was just thinking about this yesterday. I still have all of these moments of, what am I here? What am I doing? Is anybody listening? Is it having the impact that I wanted to have? So if you could share a moment when you're like, yes, this is a thing that I should be doing and it feels right.
I'll go. Yeah, thanks everybody too. This is really important because I'm also super introverted and highly sensitive. So, and then I have issues with vision. So committing to be in community, I think is important to highlight what it takes for people to show up. And we create what we need. And all these tie into it because to me, everything's connected. It really is. I think Jordan can speak to that. I was always like the young elder, but still very much developing like everyone else as a griot, as a storyteller. And the most important stories are the ones we tell ourselves, is what I think about as someone who I believe what happened to me. I believe what didn't happen to me, those things. And community care. There's a quote, I forget what this person's name is. I think the last name is Valerio. And they say, yelling self-care, people who need community care is what keeps us all struggling. And so I tell people as a survivor, I'm good at self-care. I need community care. I need to be able to let others know what gifts I have. And so an affirmation for that for me is the community that made it possible for me to be a part of this conversation, the things that I don't see that go on behind the scenes where someone is literally not only rooting for me, but maybe rubbing my back and I don't know, consensually. So that, and also my grandfather, bless his holy and ancestor, Willis Draffin, was the founding member of the band Bloodstone. And so as I got older and I realized how much I am the embodiment of my grandfather, that is affirmative in like a metaphysical, real realm for me. But an affirmation is like when I have cancerversaries to acknowledge what I still endure, and loved ones come and experience healing arts, sick arts, communal art, things like that. And most recently, I was able to complete an artist in residency. I'm 36 and like everyone extracts my art, they steal from me, but no one comes back and tell me like, yo, you put me on, that affirms me. So I'm always having a cry for help, like a primal cry. And that's so inspirational. I'm like, no, I don't know if we can cuss, but I want to say F that, fuck that. And so I'm also very irritable and frustrated. So affirmations show up in ways where if I had a residency for 6 months and no one really cared about what I was doing, and I open up the gates and let folks come and touch the things I've made as a visual artist, as a person with declining health in real time. And then the community, literally all the folks that came through touching the art and just moving it around, that was deeply affirming because a lot of the art I make is with what people call found objects, but things that for me are in the community. So it can't be denied. If it's a box from pizza spot that I found everyone goes to, but something comes through, that's deeply affirming because I need that psycho-emotional, psycho-spiritual stimulation as a storyteller. So that lets me know someone believes me when they touch the things that I've created, if I invite them in to do so.
That's absolutely beautiful. I love Andre so much. He's such a light. But I believe that going back to community is that community feels like the thing that affirmed me as an artist. Communities such as even Yaki Smith on here and his wife Michaela, they're people who are integral to me even understanding the word artist, me even being able to put a word to it, because I knew I did this thing and I knew I loved doing this thing and I knew that there was a healing mechanism within this thing. I didn't know what to call it, I didn't know what to call it. I didn't know what it was. And there was a moment when I remember hearing Yaki when I was younger, use the word artist. I didn't think I deserved that title, because I always saw artist as something that was so far away from me and so, so high and so educated and so, aged and rich. Like I just respected it in a way that I didn't feel like I was deserving of the title. but I think community affirmed the fact that I already was to begin with, that I was from the beginning, and I just had to put on the crown that was bought and paid for in the Baldwin terms. And I feel like as through that fuel of community, I started to really understand the power of storytelling and the power of creating community through storytelling. And not, I see television and film specifically, even stage, but television and film is a dangerous weapon. And it's a dangerous weapon because it has so much access to so many people at so many points in times for the rest of time. Like that's a lot of power. But you would be surprised how like most people in the industry don't approach it with that level of power. Because I appreciate the fact that, you know, even in something like the Miss Pat Show, which is a sitcom, you know, I get to tell stories about the gender nonconforming community with this woman who is very much, you know, an old school Black woman, you know, from the hood, who does not understand, you know what I mean? Who does not understand what it is that we're asking, right? The respect that we're asking, and using that gap in her to represent a part of the audience that also doesn't understand and does not engage or does not have queer people within their community, right? And so I feel like one thing that's really important, even with the art, is finding, specifically being somebody from like Black culture who's like truly like has its own issues with queerness, right? That we're starting to work through. But this idea of bridging that gap of communication, and through communication comes conversation in community. And the expectation of, like, I was talking to one of my mentors who's, you know, 80 years old, and she was recalling an incident where you know, she was talking to someone who was gender nonconforming, and they like cussed her out for saying, hey, like, can you come over and see how you doing, man? Da, da, da. And she was completely distraught because she was like, how, I didn't know that I offended, right? And so I feel like it's something just as simple as, actually, what you just did wasn't cool. I'm gonna tell you why it wasn't cool. If you do it again, we're gonna have a problem, right? You know what I mean? That's when it's like, I have to engage with you as another human being who does not know me, does not know what I desire, does not know who I am, who I identify as, and I have to ask you for respect, right? That's as far as it goes. And then when you don't respect me, then that's a different thing, right? So it's like using art to actually have that conversation as well and bridging that gap. Because otherwise, I feel like the problem with the world right now is don't nobody want to listen to nobody. Don't nobody want to listen to nobody. Don't nobody want to talk to nobody. Everybody want to be in their own little intersections and talking within their own little intersections, and then not necessarily being willing to step outside and be like, what are you talking about over there? Oh no, baby, that's not how that goes. Let me tell you how that goes, right? That's where I feel like I'm aiming to move forward in my art, as far as my queerness and my affirmation as an artist and my affirmation in my goal as an artist, is to that community, conversation, celebration equals liberation, you know?
Yeah, I love that.
I love that. Yeah.
Drew, would you like to add to our conversation?
No, I mean, I was just going to say that I really love, actually, can you say that one more time? Because I want to remember it.
Yes, I said community conversation celebration equals liberation.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and actually, so I'm gonna play off some of that because you're talking about people not wanting to step outside of their own perspectives and like seek out these different conversations, and they're just going through their lives not knowing, you know, outside of those blinders. And I actually think that that's one of the most beautiful gifts that art has, is starting those conversations. And people go into art, into an art show, into a play, into a movie, into, you know, music, open, wanting to experience something in a way that they don't walk through the world always. And in a way that when they see something different, when they're just in a coffee shop, they don't stop and say, hey, let me have this experience with you. Let me try to see things through your eyes. And somehow art tricks people into desiring to see things from different perspectives. And it's a beautiful tool in that way. And so for myself, my story is a little different with this question, because I always wanted to be an artist. And I was actually always very clearly, I was very lucky. I was very clearly affirmed by my family from a very early age to be an artist. And I think it helped that they're not in my immediate family, but in my extended family, there were professional artists. I had a great aunt Juana whose paintings hung all across my house growing up. And so for me, there wasn't a huge question in being an artist. However, when I got close to going to college, all of a sudden, a lot of people were questioning me about how I was going to be an artist. And it had to somehow get logistical and be made into a business. And I felt, I kind of took that and I internalized it. And I also kind of used it because I had a lot of people outside of my family being like, you can't be an artist, teachers, random people love to give you advice on like what you should do when you're young. Actually, no, always, but I felt like especially in that, like, they'd be like, oh, you're graduating high school soon. Let me tell you what you should do with your life. So my defense mechanism for that was I had created a list of potential art careers that were seen as respectable, quote unquote. And so I went into the commercial art world. I worked on video games and movies, and I had a little bit of time as an illustrator. And I very much rooted my work in that for a very long time, creating work for others, creating work that was corporate. I prided myself in my ability to do that. And anytime I would tell people I was an artist, I would specify I'm a working artist, and as like a way to differentiate myself from the common misconceptions of like starving artist that I had somehow grown to fear so much. So for me, I want to answer this question talking about when I decided to finally let go of all that baggage and make the jump into doing fine art that was my voice. And that was actually a moment I was growing really dissatisfied in my jobs and just realizing that I didn't like what I was putting out into the world. I didn't think it was changing the world for the better. I didn't feel like it was representing me. And I had come out, 3 years before as trans, but I worked in an atmosphere that I couldn't be out at work. And so I was living my social life as myself. And then I was putting on this male costume and going to work every day, and then going home and taking it all off, and then going and living my life. And that separation was causing me a lot of trauma. And it was becoming inescapable. And I had this idea of doing a self-portrait of myself as a trans woman, visibly femme, and it was the most terrifying concept I had ever had. And I had a lunch with an old friend that I'd known since I was like 13, and kind of laid it out for her. This is what I'm thinking to do. Am I crazy? And I was like shaking. I was so terrified. And even just the fact that I went to this friend, I felt like I had to get permission from other people even to just do this. And creating that self-portrait was intense therapy. I found myself sitting back and looking at it and like crying. And I didn't realize how badly I needed to share that part of myself through art. And I also didn't realize how badly I needed to see myself portrayed in art. And that was the thing that by the time I finished that painting, I knew, I was like, this is just what I have to do. I can't not do this. And so I left my video game art job and started doing the thing. And it's interesting because now I actually have a few years ago returned back into doing commercial artwork, actually also in video games. But I got to do it on my own terms. I'm not letting go of my fine art. And I'm also not letting go of myself. I am out as myself, and I go to work as myself, and I'm bringing my whole self to everything I do now. And it's wonderful. And so that's what that decision looked like for me. Actually, sorry, I have one more thing I wanted to say, because Jordan, you said something really lovely that reminded me of that moment that I wanted to tie back in, where you're talking about creating your first queer character and how writing that was an exorcism. And that definitely resonated with me in that creating my first self-portrait. It definitely felt like putting that out there was an exorcism. And I really love that.
Absolutely. I was thinking, I was connecting the two exactly when you said that too. I was like, yes, that feeling. That feeling.
And I want to say too, give thanks for your testimony and you seeing yourself, because then I had a chance to check out your portraits, and a couple that I read through. One who's standing out right now is Dora. I live with a woman named Dora in Brazil. And so just reading that testimony and just, you know, everything that I'm hearing, all I'm hearing really too is ritual and ceremony. Hearing words like, you know, exorcism. These aren't like just words in the zeitgeist or popular discourse. This is real. Like, we're still these ancient people. And so being able to imagine these beings, and whether we're on a panel or not, to just be like, oh, okay, I'm gonna check everybody's stuff out. I got some stuff I want to see. And I was able to feel it. And also I forget the individual's name, I believe trans man who was in their 50s when they had a top surgery. And he talked about the hormones and just the invitation with consent through the healing arts is what really, 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 really stood out to me. And it made me think, as you both were speaking, specifically someone that outside of ancestors like Marlon Riggs, Audre Lorde, those people who talked about being sick in their art, therefore that being a form of storytelling, is my dear friend Tim, who is always there to remind me, like, you don't sell your, like, it's whatever, you're an artist because you live as an artist. What you do is creative, how you breathe, how you engage. You're a living artist. And so he's like, the way you're able to navigate most difficult situations takes creativity, an immense amount of just kuumba. And like, I know I said Ubuntu in my bio, and I think that's important to mention. It's a Swahili word that means I am because we are. And it's very that. And I'm feeling all of that, as well as kuumba, which is creativity, and it means to leave a place better than when you inherited it. So that's what I keep feeling through everything.
To leave a place better than when we inherited it. I'm mentally recording that. That's beautiful, and such a phenomenal capturing of creativity to create, right? I also wanted to highlight that I'm hearing a lot of art as gathering space, and not only that, but the vulnerability and courage and scariness of doing that, right? To issue an invitation and open yourself up like that. So thank you all for sharing. My next question has some possible avenues you could take in your answer. So we're coming up on the period of the semester when students turn in final projects. And I often get from my students a question and a fear that I often still have, which is, what if I create this thing and it doesn't land the way that I want it to land, right? Like, I have this vision for it. What if people interpret it wrong? What if, I misstep? And the danger of that fear is that it keeps us from saying things at all, right? So I'm curious, either if you've had that experience and it turned out fine because you're all phenomenal and successful, or if you deal with that fear, and what is your strategy for sort of responding to that talk within yourself?
I'll start this one. Yeah, so a few things come to mind. One, actually, when I started my series, Gender Portraits, I made the conscious decision not to only center trans folk. And I think that because a lot of times, especially now, when we have these larger gender conversations, it is centered around trans folks, especially in queer spaces. And I am a trans woman myself. I think a lot of people go in with the assumption that my work is about trans people, And so when they see stories that don't fit that narrative, I have a lot of people coming to me being like, wait, why is this person in here that person doesn't identify as trans, or this, this is gonna, there's been a lot of pushback to the fact that I included 2 drag performers in my series, and people, especially trans people, have had to fight a lot of misconceptions of trans people being drag performers. And so I had a lot of pushback to that. Um, and I find those moments as an artist, moments for a deeper conversation, to be like, well, why did you have that misconception? Like, what brought you to that conclusion? What is it about what you're bringing to the table that's doing that? And also, this is where I'm coming from. And the conversations that came out of those moments actually tended to be very beautiful, and very like explorative, and actually did the work that I wanted to do with the series. So they ended up being very positive. Another thing just is the general fear of publishing work that is vulnerably queer, vulnerably trans. Like it is terrifying, and there's just the fear of the misconception, or fear of the misinterpretation of just the hostile backlash. And I remember when before my first show, I had nightmares about people vandalizing my artwork. And those things didn't come to pass in that way, but I have had, the turf raid mobs, when I would live stream my paintings, or things like that. And those moments, unfortunately, don't lead as much to the restorative conversation. It's not generative conflict, it's just conflict. But I think that also shows, as an artist, that I both love and hate this adage that like that you're making good art if it upsets somebody, but it is in the sense that like some people, that things, not all the time, but sometimes people who are upset by art, it bounces in their head more, and they have to sit with it, and they have to think about why it upsets them. Sometimes that leads to growth, sometimes it doesn't. But also, we can't always wait. You cannot wait for everybody to be on board with what you're going to do, or you're never going to do anything. And that is not only true of artists, but that's true of self. If I had to wait for everybody to affirm my gender, I would have never transitioned. And so yeah, that's.
Some people need to be uncomfortable, and sometimes we need to be uncomfortable, and that's just necessary for growth, for sure.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like people picking up off of that is exactly, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I'm realizing that if I didn't make somebody uncomfortable, I wasn't true to myself. But also realizing that like I never want to make people uncomfortable just to make people uncomfortable. Because I've seen art do that as well. I've seen people just do that for the response of the provoking, right? But it's like that's not my place. All I can do is my truth, right? And it's like the minute that I'm looking for outside validation for that truth, searching for it while I'm working on the work, then it is no longer the work. It is the product. Like it just becomes something for consumption. Like for me, and this is why TV is so hard for me. Working with TV is so hard for me, because I am constantly fighting with networks, constantly fighting with like, you know what I mean? Like it's constantly a bend and pull. You can't do that. But it's like, that's what's real. It's like, that's how people talk. That's how people talk. That is what we talk about. So why can't, if that is reality, why can't it be uplifted as art? Why can't it be seen as art? And I feel like it is like my job just to work from a place of truth. And the minute I'm not working from a place of truth, that means God has left the room for me. That means that has nothing to do with spirit. That has nothing to do with what is meant to be said into the world. That has everything to do with what needs to be said into my bank account. And that is when I have to reevaluate. but I try not to care, even though I feel like as humans, we do care about what people think. That's just the reality. Like, I don't give a damn what people think. We do care, but what matters is, does it matter? You know, does it matter? We can care, but does it matter?
Shay, thank y'all, because I really wasn't hearing you all respond to the question. Gave me some feels. I would say for me, I live by these African principles like Huji Chagalia. So that means that the core of my core is strong, my self-determination, which means I'm probably always a puddle of tears and a mess in the physical appearing world, but it's I'm accessing how I really feel constantly as a porous human being. But what's really wild is like I'm reflecting on this in community. I'm still thinking about that. I was diagnosed with cancer at 18 in a world that refuses to acknowledge that anyone has pain, especially a young Black gay man who's an artist. And so when I hear people imagine like life without discomfort, it just seems so like, wow, just it's something to bear witness to, because growing up as a poor Black kid in Kansas City was always hard. So so it was the Kuji Chagalia part that came up for me, and to tell people they got to Sankofa, you got to know where you come from. You have to think about the fact that someone else has felt like how you felt, and you got film, celluloid closet, you know what I mean? You got all kinds of resources. Go back to what you heard, listen to audios, whatever it is that appeals to you on a sensory level. I think what folks don't realize as an artist, me and my dear brother, Cole Journer, we're blessed to be the stewards of the Very Black Project. This is an anti-Black world. I'm attacked daily. People can come and decide if they like something or not, but DMs are just out of control. And I'm very sensitive. So I'm thinking about the commitment to your lineage. So Very Black for us is like, it's one, just a descendant of Africa, indigeneity, but then indigenous. And then there's also the layer of it being, I live in Oakland. I moved here from Brooklyn. Like I was like, I need to be home of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. I had to be around my elders who if they didn't use their intuitive communal understandings to make sure kids got to eat, Black kids got to eat, to think free breakfast, the government, stole that idea, so these things are just like going and realizing it's even deeper than pain, but that's not justifying anyone's pain. I have a very, very pain-filled life. And then that also just the lineage of like, Black is beautiful, Black power. These are things these things just didn't come out anywhere. These things have been fought. So we get to return in these moments. And I'm a death midwife, so I'm constantly in the threshold when one feels this way. So I would just say to them, if it helps, imagine someone like myself leading with a soft voice, soft hands, soft eyes, and cares about how you feel, whether you follow through or not. Because, you got a gift and it's going to be communicated, and it's a pandemic and it's hard as fuck. Life is hard. So I'll tell you, it's hard. I'm 36 and it's hard for me as someone who completely lives as an artist and can't imagine any other way, because the moment I stop living as an artist, I'm going to depart. And I'm enjoying myself despite all the oppression, which I think is really, again, grounding, like hearing everyone and just like bearing witness, because I've seen parts of Jordan grow, but always love our conversation. Meeting Drew, I wish I could have read every portrait and spend time with it, and also learning about, our moderator. So it's like, this for me is like imagining community moving forward, but not like fuck the past. And that's Sankofa for me. In order to move forward, we got to go back, because we're the babies. We're bound to be here, just like these COVID kids. They're going to be so lit. I always say I was an AIDS baby. I was born in the AIDS pandemic. My great grandmother was born in 1917. Like, when did you make your debut? Because there's intel in that, and that goes back to storytelling for me.
Yeah, Andre, I got to connect with what you're saying for a second. As somebody who's been chronically ill since I was 21 and on and off, stable and unstable, my relationship to time is different than people who are well. Like, I don't have time for this shit. I don't know. Like, I got shit I need to do and I need to do it now because I don't know if I can do it tomorrow, right? So that's That's the thing that's driving me sometimes. I
That's
appreciate all of you.
Thank you
that
for
is
sharing that. Thank you.
that is beautiful. That's the I don't give a fuck pill. Come on now.
Yeah, that's the thing I'm grateful for sometimes. I don't have time to give a fuck.
I love that. I love that. That's beautiful. That is absolutely beautiful.
So I want to remind our audience members that if they have questions, they're welcome to drop them in the Q&A, but I feel like I could talk to y'all forever, so I'm willing to keep driving the conversation if nobody has questions. I did want to take a moment to ask you all what you're working on or toward this year, or maybe to use Andre's phrasing, what purpose is calling to you for the coming year?
For me, I'm continuing, I deal with so much like trauma, and like before it was a buzzword, and I don't have the resources. So I'm always calling upon community to share their gifts with me so I can see what I can do. If this ministers to someone, like, be creative in reaching out. I think we literally, Ancestor Gwendolyn Brooks said, we are each other's harvest. You know, there's a Black woman from Bronzeville who said, we are each other's business, we are each other's bonds. And my whole 36 years, I've been committed. I've taken my role as a storyteller, griot, butch queen, whatever the language have you. And I'm at that point where the world gets to see how we take care of those who've been stewards. And I'm like a triple earth sign, all the cosmologies, I'm earth. So how we're treating the earth, we can see through souls like myself. I don't think I'm exempt. I think we're all different elements, fire, water. And so I hope, you know, to have some relaxation and people work with me closely, understanding my gifts in their role instead of just thinking they're going to save me too. Like, we want to put you on a panel with 500 people. And I'm like, that sounds great in the physical world, but I know other ways that we can still get it across while incorporating that. So I guess goals for me is still just trying to feel okay, not even feel great, but feel okay physically. I think spiritually, emotionally, I'm pretty solid, but the physical part's really hard. So we'll see. I want to dance this summer. I love dancing.
I feel what's calling to me is, of course, I'm doing this right now, which wraps up soon, and it'll be out this summer. Yay, 10 episodes. Praise God. But I think what's really calling me, going back to community. And I'm ready to get back on stage. I'm ready to tell stories to people's faces. I'm ready to engage with audiences and curiosities, and I'm just ready to be in the live space. That's why I'm hoping that, even though I know that this this new variant is happening and knocking people's noses and Kleenexes out, I really hope that I can like just be in the space with people again, and not have to talk with each other behind masks and miss a smile. You know, I got to tell you, smiling through your eyes, that's not cute. So I'm really looking forward to that. But also, there's so many stories that are just brewing inside of me, that feel like they need to be, they just need to be given birth to. They have to come out. A lot of questions, really, mainly everything comes out in form of questions. So I'm looking for time to just be able to explore that. But most of all, just be amongst community again. I want to dance like Andre.
Seriously. Oh my gosh. I was actually nervous about this question because I feel like I have been in this moment of transition, like dealing with a lot of depression and isolation, and not really knowing quite what this next year is going to hold. And so it's really beautiful to hear y'all talking about this, of just wanting to dance, and that is actually very much where I am. You know, Gender Unbound, the nonprofit I mentioned earlier, we were supposed to have our 5th International Arts Festival in 2020, which became a virtual showcase. And we got to hire and pay a bunch of trans intersex artists, which is always a win. But we did not create a physical space, and we did not hold that space and celebrate and dance with our communities, and that it felt different. You know, I got to see some view numbers. That was how I experienced our impact, which is not what I'm used to. It is not what I do it for. You know, I don't do it for a statistic of this many people saw it. I do it for seeing people show up on dates and hold each other, seeing people cry, like talking with them, connecting with them. I want to create an experience. And so we did not continue doing virtual events in 2021 because we didn't feel like it was actually meeting our goals. And I do not do well in isolation. And as a fine artist, I had actually a show in 2021, and it was the only show I've never showed up to. My art was there. I got to see some pictures. I didn't actually see it. And so I've been dealing with a lot of trauma, a lot of depression over the last few years. And I think that 2022, I'm hoping, is a chance to, but I feel like I feel fuller. I feel like I have more capacity. And I'm hoping to maybe use art to process some of that, because art is great at processing trauma. And at least expressing and creating voice to what you're going through. So I'm hoping to start creating again. But I'm also, I'm about to move. I live in Austin right now, but I'm about to live in Oregon in about a month and a half. My wife is following her dreams and going back to school to be an architect, and I'm following her and supporting her and living her best self. And so I'm even going to be finding new community. I'm going to be like, oh, there's going to be a lot of new. And that is both terrifying and exhilarating. And I'm hoping that I get to dance. I hope that I actually get to encounter all these things in person, and if I can't, I'll find my way through it. But I'm really holding out hope that I'll get to actually share space and also transform that energy that I'm given by sharing space with people physically into something creative. And kind of maybe this is a great time to even change up my style, change up what I create a little bit. And nothing's off the table. So I think this is a time of discovery for me.
That makes me think of Elder Alice Walker has a book titled, it's phenomenal, Hard Times Require Furious Dancing. So I feel like we're going to fuck some floors up, in the name of God and spirit, and wherever we arrive, we'll be there. Ashe.
I want that for all of us. And Drew, congrats on the impending move. I'm bummed on behalf of Austin, but I hope it does bring you all of the exciting new opportunities.
I'll be back. All of my family lives here. I'm like an 8th generation Texan, so y'all will see me again.
Relieved, a little bit relieved. I do. So the final question I had for you all is part of my own agenda. Some part of me deeply hates that the only stories we hear about trans people or queer people of color are usually tragedy. Like that is the time that we appear. So the question I wanted to end with for you all is, what is something that brought you joy recently or is bringing you joy right now?
I really appreciate that question. I really appreciate that question.
This is bringing me some joy right now.
So much joy.
That's actually facts. That's actually facts.
I've been on a lot of Zooms.
I was so nervous. And I was so nervous. Yeah, so I was just like, I just have to tell people when I'm nervous or I'm just gonna look crazy. And I don't wanna look how I don't, I love context and just meeting you all, learning what other folks living right now are living with and through. It really brings me deep joy.
Yeah. And I will say, actually, during some of these lulls between waves, I've actually started going out and I got to meet new people a couple times. I know. Yeah. I actually I'm a nerd. complete nerd, and I've been playing a lot of D&D virtually, specifically with a group in New York. And one of the people came to Austin, and I got to meet someone who I've been playing D&D for the last year with in person, and we shared
Wow.
drinks at a restaurant. It was
Yes.
I love
phenomenal.
it.
Yeah.
Intimacy.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, don't we need it? Don't we
I,
need
I,
it?
I recently was in Colorado in Bachelor Gulch with an important, like, just community of people, young adult cancer survivors, patients, folks living with multiple sclerosis, and healthcare workers. So that's always overwhelmingly beautiful to meet other young people who've been enduring. I just love survivors. I just love us. I love us that are just like, those who resist remain. That's a Belanta expression. And so our remaining is so phenomenal, it's breath giving. And so to spend time with them, I was nervous about that and this, but they were all just like really just excitement to be with my people.
I love that. Y'all have also just sparked so many just wheels turning that I just keep writing these down. Like so many wheels turning just to like see some of the words that have come out of your mouth just like plastered on the wall, just as reminders. That's the thing about panels, is like just wanting to capture and keep all the words that have been thrown into the space and looking at them. I realize that that's a thing for me, is being able to look at words and receive them and not just hear them and they live in the moment.
Well, Jordan, I have to tell you, that's exactly, clearly we're connected, because that's how I make my art. That's what this residency did. I have words, like these are just some of the things. Like,
Yeah.
it's recording, it's storytelling, and just when you said that, and they don't get completed, all the time.
Yeah.
But just you saying that is an affirmation, where when I mentioned community, folks came in and put, I don't know, hundreds of them. I had a loved one commit suicide. I had a loved one whose mother died, and all of these things that I stepped in that threshold. And like you said, there are words that they have to come out some way. And with my little sweaty, hyper perspiration self, I use stickers and glue, and it slows me down with these little bitty stickers to capture what we say, and that's what I mean, where someone can take that and make money off of it, but they're missing the storytelling, where we get to, this was just as important as loved ones coming in and being like, that's a lot of stickers and a lot of cardboard, but it's how we see. And I see how we see, you see how we see, and it restores our vision, even those of us who have compromised, corneal type stuff. So I was just excited to show that. I was like, this feels appropriate. I'll send you a link.
I need to do that. I feel like that's almost a good exercise. It's like when you hear something that stays with you, write it down, and then go home at the end of the day and have these materials for you to put it.
Ashe.
Like to put it in place. I love that.
That's all we're doing.
I love that.
I love this because I also, so one of my favorite things at community events that we would run, that I cannot wait until they actually get started again, is we started at a certain point putting up, we just covered some walls in like white butcher paper and gave people a bunch of markers and supplies, and just let them share their experiences while they're at the events. And, it was a way to have attendees get to share their creativity while they're also viewing all this art and bringing in like the artists that, we were showcasing. And what would get created out of those were some of my most favorite things. And we would take as many photographs as possible, but I would like roll them up and I would keep them. And one of them that we did, I actually just found it because with my move, I used to keep everything that was gender unbound actually in this room that I'm sitting in.
Wow.
And now I'm passing over the reins to all of my other organizers to carry on without me. So we got a storage unit, and so I was going through all of our things and I found a box. And what we had done on this one Trans Day of Visibility is we gotten blue, pink, and white Post-it notes. And people were supposed to write an affirmation that they wanted to share with their community, and then put it up on the wall and create basically a shape of the trans flag out of these Post-it notes of everyone's affirmations. And I found the stack that I'd saved of all the Post-it notes. And I was just going through them, and I just like waves of emotion. And I love this.
What did it feel like? What did it feel like? Because there was people's writing, right? Like the actual hand, not digital, well, digital, but not virtual.
Yeah, it's their handwriting, and it brought me back to that moment, because that's what y'all were talking about, is like writing down these words so that you keep them. And I was there again. I felt I felt surrounded by these people, and especially in a moment where I have been experiencing a lot of isolation, that was a treasured gift. And so it's really beautiful. Yeah. And I was looking, I was like, oh, I got to show y'all. Then I realized it's all in a storage unit now. None of it lives in here. So
show us later.
Yeah, it's late.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm noticing that we're at time, and I don't want to take up more of your time, but thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I'm supposed to remind our attendees that they can rejoin this conference colloquium at 2:00 p.m. for After Moody, a conversation with LGBTQIA alums and their allies. But otherwise, I hope that you all got as much out of this conversation as I did. This was really just the highlight of my month/year. It was wonderful to meet you all.
Likewise.
Yeah, thank y'all so much.
Thank you. Ciao.
Yeah, thank you all. This has been a pleasure.